All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everybody. Good to see everybody here. Seems like quite our normal crowd. If you're new, welcome. My name's Cujo, or Josh, and we're just going to cover tonight. I'd like to cover a couple of things that kind of are happening in the UAS space, and then we'll kind of take it from there. Discussion is always open. If you have something to say, a question to ask, please feel free to do so. So we will go ahead and jump right into something we were talking about right at the beginning. So this week, Arizona Senator Martha McSally, who is my own senator here in the state of Arizona, introduced a new bill in the Senate called Securing Our Skies Against Chinese Technology. So basically what it would do would prohibit any Chinese manufactured drone, or let me change this. It would prevent any drone manufactured in China or by a Chinese company from being purchased and utilized by a government, including state and local public safety organizations. So I will put a link in here to the article. For those who don't know, Martha McSally was an Air Force pilot, and I have a sneaking suspicion that we're going to see a lot of this type of legislation in the coming months and years, not just relating to drones, but to a lot of things in regards to China. So this is I also, just below it, I posted a link to the bill itself. It's very short. And basically no funds appropriated or otherwise made available for fiscal year 2020 and available for obligation as of the date of this act. And then no funds appropriated or otherwise made available for fiscal year 2021 or any fiscal year thereafter may be obligated or expended to purchase a drone described in subsection B, which basically just says a drone described in this subsection is a drone manufactured in the People's Republic of China or by an entity owned or controlled by the government of the People's Republic of China. Dave, do you know, is DJI owned by the PRC? I don't think so.
It's not. It's a privately held firm. But in reading the bill, it looks like it's a manufactured in People's Republic of China or owned by an entity controlled by the government. And so if DJI just moves a manufacturing location, they could skirt this bill.
Yeah. So McSally did reference DJI when she introduced this bill, where DJI has donated dozens of drones as part of its disaster relief program for COVID-19. So the article goes on to say that Senator McSally's copycat bill tries to put a new face on the old and discredited idea of taking life-saving technology away from America's first responders, including firefighters and law enforcement officers across Arizona. Government experts who actually use drones agree that banning or restricting drone technology based on where it is made is a fear-driven policy that would make America less safe, and the U.S. business and government agencies that use DJI can secure and protect the data they collect. So they go on to say that DHS has been skeptical of drones made in China for years. And DHS has concluded with high confidence, and I put high confidence in air quotes, that DJI markets drones to U.S. organizations to expand its ability to collect and exploit sensitive U.S. data. During that same year, being 2017, the U.S. Army stopped using DJI products.
So does that help answer TextJust's question about whether or not the bill states what the threats are that they're addressing with it?
So basically, it goes on to say that the suspicion is that they are using the drones to spy. It says the U.S. Department of the Interior officially grounded hundreds of DJI drones, though it didn't specifically mention concerns about China spying. The order followed a more informal pause of the technology. DJI provided a reaction to The Verge about the pause. We are aware of the DOI has decided to ground its entire drone program, and we are disappointed to learn of this development. As a leader in commercial drone technology, we have worked with the DOI to create a safe and secure drone solution that meets their rigorous requirements, which was developed over the course of 15 months. We will continue to support the DOI and provide assistance as it reviews its drone fleet so the agency can quickly resume the use of drones to help federal workers conduct vital operations.
So as a computer geek, what DJI did, what you were just describing, was they essentially created a clean room of their code and provided it under the spec to the United States Department of Interior, and this code explicitly was designed so that it would not phone home any data. And so it was cleared and it was being sold to the Department of Interior, and then the various executive orders, and now several bills have come forward.
This one, however, is restricted. This particular bill, unlike others that we have seen, this one is strictly drone manufactured in the People's Republic of China, or by an entity owned or controlled by the government of the People's Republic. This does not include parts. So, this is entire drone solutions like a DJI drone, as opposed to motors and flight controllers and that kind of stuff. So this is very short. This is one of the shortest bills I've probably read in the last, I don't know, since we started this. Since we started the FPVFC. So that was nice. But yeah, so very short and to the point. While we're on the topic, not necessarily on the specific topic of DJI, but we did mention them. So this article comes from Drone Life. Oh, TextJet's typing something. I'll wait. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it seems like, if you want to go all conspiracy theory, I live in Phoenix, out past Buckeye. We have a nuclear power plant. If I lived out there, I happened to catch some images of a nuclear power plant. That video could be phoned home as, to the People's Republic of China. They can use that to plan something. That's very conspiracy, theory. Number one, not only, that image or that video is getting sent back, or that whatever data it collects, but that they're finding it in the hundreds of thousands of other videos uploaded on a daily basis from drones. So and exactly, you can get a satellite view of a power plant. So it's, I don't know, it just, people can say, oh, there's more real-time data, or
why stop at drones? Why not continue on to cell phones or Samsung devices or network cards or Wi-Fi adapters or thousands of other things?
Well, there was a small, it wasn't a small story, but it was a small chip on certain motherboards and electronics components that they say phoning home to China and exploiting data and backdoors and all this kind of stuff.
There was no proof of that one, if it's the one I'm thinking of, but definitely people thinking about it.
Yeah, so, and I remember it was like this tiny little component that you almost needed a microscope to see. So, but conspiracy theories, are abound these days, and there's a lot of distrust, I think, right now in the world, and so it'll be interesting to see what kind of comes from that. And yes, I do agree. It is kind of overreach. I think a lot of the things that are coming out in regards to drones are overreach. In terms of this kind of stuff or regulation or all that kind of stuff. So I do want to post a couple articles, which I'll get to in a bit, but this article comes from Drone Life. It's an update on Autel's lawsuit against DJI. This one goes into, it looks like, from what I've seen, is that they have negated the patent violations informally, and they're saying that any decision regarding this issue it's unlikely that it'll restrict DJI sales in the United States. So if you're new to this, Autel filed a couple of patent violations. One would be intelligent operations, using technology on their drone. So one would be intelligent operations such as obstacle avoidance. The other one would be selling a drone with rotor blades. And the other one would be with batteries that clamp onto the drone. So 3 different patent violations.
The report I saw said that they were all counts were thrown out. Right? Is that was my read on this? So
this is So all this was that all 3 of those patent violations were thrown out, but the commission has yet to rule officially on it. It needs to be confirmed, is what I'm seeing here. So that decision needs to be confirmed. So in order to be kind of wrapped up.
Okay.
So there's that. In other news, the FAA UAS Symposium is coming up in July. So it's a 2-day virtual event. US. I forgot to pull a link for this one. I'm sorry. Let me grab that real quick. So here is the website.
They're going to teach us all about UAS.
Right. So episode 1 is July 8th through the 9th, and I guess they're doing an episode 2, which is going to be August 18th and 19th. So they are going to have discussions on safety, remote ID, regulations, delivery beyond visual line of sight, and flight time. The program is still being developed, so they don't have a list of exactly what they're going to cover. How?
To Alex's question, I've not looked at the registration price for these.
It's expensive.
Yeah, these were pricey if you're not a student, but they do have student prices as well. 200, someone said.
So it's 175 for if per episode. So if you only want to do one, it's 175 for a student pass. If you only want to do 1 day of one episode, it's $150. If you want to do both episodes as a student, it's $300. And if you want to do it as not a student or government or military or public safety, it's $375. So my overall issue with this, and I know this is echoed a whole heck of a lot of times they charge tickets because they're renting a space. They are, they're set up in terms of, displays and pamphlets and all that kind of stuff. This is a virtual event. Like, what the F?
Wouldn't it be awesome if we could say it was free for all FPVFC members?
Right, that would be awesome. But at the same time, it's just like, this is an unlimited attendance. limited only by their server or whatever servers they decide to use. Like, what is the point of that price tag? So I'm a little bit irked by that. It makes it very cost prohibitive for the average person who wants to learn and understand about this stuff. It just makes it massively cost prohibitive
Makes it
to
very
be
commercial.
involved. Yeah,
Good
and
good
that's
question from text chat. Who's the audience? The audience is predominantly commercial,
yep.
and so it's large firms, manned aviation getting into UAS, as well as software companies. And I think we could just about guarantee that the 8 cohorts with the remote ID USS would be there.
Yeah, and they'll see that as a very inexpensive
Yeah.
Sure.
thing to go to.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, and that's kind of where I'm coming from. TextJet is that it just makes absolutely no sense. So, and they're calling it the remotely piloted edition. How fancy. So sorry, I'm a little bit irked by this, as if you couldn't tell. So, they do have. I'm gonna dig in here. So
yeah, I hope you're right there,
Interesting.
Alex, that they do release the videos later for free. That would be nice.
Yeah.
yeah,
They
it
have
would be
done
nice
that.
to not.
Yeah, they have done that in the past.
It would be nice to not have to,
Yeah.
wait a week or a month to get that
Right.
information, though.
So
So
what is, and to Josh's point, what is frustrating is that this is a FAA hyphen AUVSI event. So when it's in person, this is a very valuable networking event for us. And last year at the last day, or after the last day of this event, was the uh, Drone Advisory Committee, and that's exactly what will happen this year. This year's DAC is June. Oh, look at that! It's off. They offset it. This year's DAC is June 19. It is also virtual, and the attendance is you must apply and be approved. So that those invitations are open. So if you'd like to attend or sit in on the next DAC, we've got 2 tasking groups we're participating in again, and that will be hopefully live streamed as well. I'm almost positive it will be, in addition to just being virtual to the people signing in. It's interesting. Yeah. So what's the purpose of signing in? Good question.
So parties attending the symposium, I would imagine it's going to be a lot of the manufacturers, people like DJI, Autel, um, uh, as well as, and I'm talking big manufacturers. I'm not talking like FPV manufacturers. There may be some there. I'm not sure. Lumineer might be there. I'm not sure. I'm just guessing, so don't take that. But then you'd have a lot of guest speakers, experts. There's probably going to be some symposium or some events on counter UAS technology, I'd imagine. New technology coming up, new uses for UAS. Could be a lot of the things that we see just on a more commercial grade scale.
Right.
And then I'd also imagine that there's going to be a lot of press releases, based around that. Usually a lot of journalists attend those kinds of meetings, if they're interested in that space, obviously. So.
Right. And AUVSI is exclusively commercial, so there is 0 recreational representation at the event. And changing gears a little, Alex had a question about above for the DAC. What's the normal response from the FAA if you've requested attendance? And it's usually within 2 weeks of the event itself. They are very much a just-in-time operation, the way they handle their work.
Yeah. That's put us up against the Rock more than once.
Yeah.
More so Dave up against the Rock than anybody else. But
This is actually, yeah, no problem.
yeah.
Correct.
And some of you may have known this, but I didn't until earlier this week. DJI, or no, not DJI. I'm sorry. Let's get off DJI. DRL has a new president. This was an article in Forbes. Rachel Jacobson. She comes from the NBA. She was an NBA executive, and this was a little interview with her. There are, if you didn't know, DRL is hosting virtual events right now on the DRL Sim. I think this Sunday is the third one out of a series of like 8. So it's every Sunday, and it's on NBCSL and Twitter. So if you're looking for something to watch or want to see some, what's going on with DRL. I did get a chance to go to DRL when they were in Phoenix here. It was an awesome event. They did a great job. But the nice thing is we're getting, DRL, I wouldn't say we, but DRL is getting bigger and bigger, and they're getting recognition from other sports leagues. So that bodes well for our hobby to a certain extent. It gets us that positive recognition we so desperately need and deserve, as opposed to all the fear mongering and stuff that we usually see in regards to drones. So this was an interesting article. If you have a couple of times or a couple of minutes, it's worth a read. And DRL is they do some stuff with STEM, the DRL Academy. I think overall their mission is really innovative and doing great things for our hobby. So congrats to them. And then this is going to be the last article I have prepped for today, but we can be free to discuss. This was a really cool article from SUAS News regarding using FPV drones for recreational therapy. So he is using FPV to act as a therapy treatment to people with PTSD and traumatic brain injuries, which I think is amazing. Because I can imagine, when you're forging pathways into the brain after an injury, the more stimulus you can apply to it. And I'm not a doctor, but this just makes sense in my brain. So, slap me if I'm wrong. But the more stimulus you can provide to that process, I would imagine the better it is for healing. And I think FPV is amazing, and I think it creates a massive interaction between the person and what they're doing. And we all know if we fly FPV, it provides us massive amounts of joy. And he talks about current therapies and practice with disabled veterans is tying a fly for water fishing. And it's just like, to tie a fly or go out and fly FPV. Makes a whole lot of sense. I'm not a fisher, so I'm not a fisherman.
Hey,
so.
I'm a fly fisherman. It's pretty, it's awesome. It's pretty mellow, and it requires concentration, and wading into the middle of a stream is a very, very relaxing event. So I get it, but it does require a lot of
motor skills, fine motor skills.
A lot of motor skills, and and to TechCheck's point.
Yes, we do.
Points, we certainly do. In addition to PTSD, during the as we created our comments for the remote ID NPRM, we also had a number of folks come forward and say that it's very useful for a light attenuation of chronic pain. And so, we have enormous regard for the benefits of what FPV can do, and almost all of the folks who are PTSD sufferers and chronic pain sufferers did so doing something that was selfless, either in the military or as a first responder. So our thanks to those folks, and this is a great hobby that can help them.
I know several people that use FPV to not only overcome those issues, but anxiety, social anxiety, ADD. ADD is my curse. I'm constantly got something going in various parts of my brain. So, it's useful for a lot of issues that people have to deal with on a daily basis, and it's done wondrous things. And I'm sure a lot of other hobbies and activities can claim the same, but it's just one more reason not to shut out another outlet for people who constantly have to live with these issues. On that note, that's all I have in terms of articles. I did want to kind of touch on, I don't want to beat a dead horse at this point, but I have read a couple articles on the Blue Angels incident. I do know it's being investigated. I don't know what's going to happen with that. That's been a major issue in the UAS space over the last couple of weeks. I know a lot of people are upset about it, and I get it. It's interesting how quickly I think that barring involvement by any other agencies or any governmental, people, how quickly the UAS community kind of lit that up. Dirty Rat, ignore, disregard if this has been addressed before. I'm new here. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining. Is the FPVFC being acknowledged, heard in the FAA roundtable, or does the community not have deep enough pockets to be considered worthy of being heard? Dave, you want to field that one?
Sure. Well, the round table, I'm not sure if you're describing something specific or general. In general terms, we're starting to gain more and more respect, and one of the primary ways that I've seen that requirements are solicited and formalized into the FAA is with their Drone Advisory Committee, and I'm now participating in my 4th and 5th tasking group. And so a tasking group is a task force that the FAA decides this is, we would like to know more about this. One of the tasking group that finished up, as an example, finished up in February was a facilities map. And so what can we do to improve the facilities map? So we worked on that. The two that we're working on right now are what can we take from manned aviation safety culture that is applicable for UAS, and also from the perspective of, there's a document called ConOps 2, which is all about unmanned traffic management, and it's a requirements document, and so the tasking was to provide input on that. So we have, because we spend time, because I've run 2 subgroups, because we take the time to do research and submit professional, polite, productive comments in on everything we do, we are gaining more and more respect. And so the subgroup I'm running on the safety culture happens to be with small commercial companies using UAS, and I'm also sitting in on the recreational subgroup that's chaired by Rich Hansen, president of AMA, and also worked on with Chad Boudreau. So I think in a general sense we are. In addition, we were also one of the 12 companies asked to be a cohort for requirements for the UAS knowledge exam. And so we are getting better and better recognition in the FAA, and it's the UAS office is not enormous, so we are the UAS Integration Office under Jay Merkel is not a huge group, so we are gaining a reputation there. In addition, one of the standards that was very important to the FAA and is now referenced again lately is the ASTM F-38 group, a UAS group under ASTM. I've joined that group, and so we'll help work on standards from that angle. A lot of we keep finding the same people working in the with the FAA, with the ASTM, and so we're trying to find, and we're being helped by a number of folks in manned aviation to recommend where we go. Another one is the UAS safety team. I've applied once, was declined, and we will apply again for that. And when it comes up, we'll put forward an application to sit at the DAC. With the work that we do with the Drone Advisory Committee, we are doing this by contacting the individual chairs. We do not have a seat at the Drone Advisory Committee at this point, but certainly we will apply as soon as they open up applications.
And while having money would be great, we've also seen with the remote ID stuff that even very large corporations have been ignored by the FAA, no matter how much money they have.
That's really well said. Yeah, absolutely.
So, companies like DJI, like Wing, several other companies that, have a vested interest of this in the UAS. A lot of them agreed with not only our stance, but stances that we kind of put forth were universal almost, and as well as the ASTM standard that we referenced in our response. That was widely looked on as a really good idea, and that was it felt like it got shot down pretty quickly. So the FAA is picking winners and losers. Yeah, I mean, here's the deal: is it's not just the FAA, guys. So a lot of this stuff was set up in the reauthorization of 2018. That document is valid for 5 years, so it will come up again in 2023. So there's a couple opportunities. Number one, the standards that the FAA has to meet were set up in that reauthorization, not just for UAS, but for manned aviation as well. So the stuff that's going on right now, like remote ID, was in that reauthorization set forth by Congress. At the time, two things happened, and we can kind of dive into this for the new guys. At the time, two things happened. One was that there was a very lukewarm response to the reauthorization and the information that was coming out of that, not just by the FPV community, but by various different other organizations that felt like it wasn't important and that we weren't fighting that kind of stuff. It was right around that time that the FPVFC kind of started. So, to be honest, it was kind of a little bit, for lack of a better term, too little too late. But at the same time, in the meantime, we have done a lot of fantastic things, including, being involved on the DIC, the Drone Advisory Committee task groups. We've put forth some responses. We've made contacts both in manned aviation and in the UAS space. Beyond that, and even more so, a lot of and to kind of touch on TechJust's points, they are getting pressed. They're getting pressed by Department of Defense. They're getting pressed by Department of Homeland Security. Because there's a large fear around UASs. It's a new technology. In terms of, to the hobbyists, it's not new, but to the government, it's a new technology. And to the general public, it's a new technology. So there's a lot of fear that's kind of espoused around that. Couple of the things that we've tried to do is show the good side of the technology, and as well as various other people. There's more and more great stories like this recreational therapy one up above that's being used. So as opposed to, it seems like right now there's a lot less of the negative press around UAS, but the ones that are showing up are major issues, like the Blue Angels incident. So, it's we've got a couple things going on beyond this. We've got the reauthorization coming up in a couple years, and we know that that's a couple years away, but that's a couple years to plan. And then we've got remote ID that's rolling up fairly quickly. The expectation is that they're going to make a decision on that by the end of 2020 and begin implementation in 2021. Now, if it's anything like the document that they proposed in the NPRM, it's got a 3-year ramp up period. So the hard part is that the government, as we're noticing in terms of UAS, is recognizing corporations and corporate kind of collectives or trade organizations revolving around the commercial industry, such as the Commercial Drone Alliance. However, they are not recognizing the millions, of recreational users that are all independent from all these other, that are just out for a hobby, out to go have fun, out to do a little photography. Could be a farmer that's just out to check on his crops, those other kinds of things that have no or little involvement with some of these commercial entities. So, that's kind of my preaching on that, but let me catch up. Let's see. Einar, the FAA has mostly been picking losers, so much so that I have to wonder if they're losing it on purpose because they're being pressured. It's, I wouldn't put it far from the tree on that one. Yeah, go ahead.
On the Reauthorization Act of 18, what kind of thing that came about? The things that came about from 18. What kind of things do you have hope that we can change for 23?
So I think a couple of things. I think that right now, I think the big focus is going to be on remote ID. I think, and I can't remember, and Dan or Dave jump in, I don't think there's anything major after remote ID that sets to put the hobby on fire.
Yeah, there is one. There was the repeal of 336 and
no, I mean after remote ID.
I'm not following what your point is. Yeah, I was going to say there, after remote ID, the next on the list would be the repeal of 336. So certainly the AMA is pressing for that, and they would like a reinstatement of the exception for model aircraft. That's what 336 was.
The Reader's Digest version for 336
is simply the exception or waiver of all regulations for recreational aircraft, and it explicitly said that a model or a recreational UAS was not an aircraft, and so that's really the Reader's Digest version.
Yeah. So basically, it was. It basically said that once they set up the rules, basically it was, height restrictions and distance restrictions and line of sight restrictions. And after that, they couldn't, they used the word promulgate any additional regulations regarding recreational UAS. And unfortunately, that got repealed in the 2018 reauthorization. So
the repeal of 336 gives them the right
to do all this remote ID and everything else. Yes. Yep. So I think one of the biggest things that we can push back on is to get that or something similar reinstated. Now, again, anything that they create during this time period, during this reauthorization, stands a fair chance of being included, even if we were to get that, exception put back in. I would imagine they'd roll up a lot of the current regulation in terms of remote ID and whatnot back into that before locking that back down again, even if we could get that pushed back. That would be the worst case scenario. Well, no, the worst case scenario is that we don't reinstate some kind of protection. The middle case would be protection, but with current regulation, and then best case scenario would be to roll it back to the original 336 of previous standards. Yeah, that was kind of my thought on it too.
Yeah. I mean, that's,
so
you got to think about that shit because it just gets sloppy, don't it?
it can, I mean, anytime the government gets involved in something, it has a chance to just get messy. And so, well, yes and no. I think that my hope is that there's some kind of concession text jet in terms of remote ID, whether it's a module that we can place on instead of having to have it manufactured in, the ability to, some other people have brought up the ability to repair our drones and having to change, or the inability to repair them. Dan, what's that legislation that's going on with Apple right now? The
like a right to repair thing?
Right to repair.
Yep, thank you. And some of that kind of rolls in, and
well, if they
like
also
that.
go with the ASTM standards recommendation of, say, having an app on your phone and you draw out a location I'm flying in, kind of like how Lance works today, that's not terrible.
No, and I mean, if it's non-invasive, doesn't cost much or anything, or or easy to implement, that's the criteria, and I have a feeling that without those three criteria being met, it's gonna be a struggle for the FAA to claim success.
Yeah, like most people said in their comments, there'll just be massive non-compliance if that's the case, because there's no incentive to comply. We're just not going to do it.
So,
if you're in the areas where you have no way to comply.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other part too. It's if you don't have internet broadcast solutions and whatnot in your area, then you're gonna be up the creek, and people just aren't going to comply just so that they can go out and do what they've been doing for the last 80 years, whether you're flying fixed wings or
actually some of the creeks I fly in don't even have cell service.
Exactly. So and yes, thank you, TextJet. We do appreciate that. We do think our ideas are good. And again, the community is to thank for a lot of that. We've done a lot of reaching out to the community and on our documents and such, and the feedback was awesome. And we will continue to do that. So, it's not just us. I think it's a lot of the community participating as well. And the more we can get participation on stuff like that, I think the better off we'll be. And as we continue to forge alliances throughout the UAS space, I think we'll be better off as well, because we will just continue to be a bigger voice. And that's not to say everybody needs to roll up under our umbrella. It's not about that, but
it is.
well, I mean, I would.
Come on now. That's why Dave's got a magnetic personality, isn't it?
Right. But at the same time, more participation and more collaboration, I think. Well, I mean, there's different companies that we're working with that we're kind of collaborating with that they're going to be independent, and so we've got a lot of great help from Drone U, but they're their own entity, but a lot of collaboration goes a long way, and I think that's my biggest thing. Somebody needs to. Okay. I'm gonna just mute that. At any rate, any questions, comments?
Yeah, I had to drop for a bit, but it seemed almost to be a bit somber when I came back.
What's that now?
But the conversation was a bit more upbeat before I dropped.
Oh, gotcha.
Were you discussing at all? I mean, I think I had read here and there trying to ram this in a year or so earlier than scheduled.
Yeah, so the remote ID, last we heard is that they had gone through all of the 55,000 comments, and that their goal was to implement, basically get the new rule released by the end of 2020 and for implementation in 2021.
And the source and timing of that statement was Jay Merkel at the UAST meeting. Oh, it was 3 to 4 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So, at some point in the next couple of months, we will. Jay Merkel is the head of the FAA UAS integration office.
Right.
Yes.
He's the executive director of the FAA UAS integration office. So the most senior FAA executive responsible for UAS. It's a good
UAS
question.
regulation. Yep.
Yep, regulation. Absolutely. Good point. Absolutely good clarification. He is not part of ATM or other aspects of the FAA.
Yep. And you can see him right around the time remote ID. There was a bunch of videos from the FAA that rolled out on some talks that they were doing. In fact, Josh from Flight Test was there. You can see him interacting with Jay Merkel there.
Yeah, it was a CES or something.
Yeah. So, but yeah. What other questions we got?
One other quick question. So in Wisconsin, I know they don't allow drone flying on state parks. I've never really looked into that, but I mean, I've always known that, so I didn't really think much of it. There's usually too many people to fly there anyway, for the most part. But I'm starting to see a lot more local communities, villages, small cities with their own sets, adding to their own rules and regulations, not allowing flying in parks, city streets, any public areas, private property, et cetera, So I guess, I think the only thing you could do is take off and land from your own property. I was just wondering what the legality of that is. So obviously they cannot restrict the airspace, but
right.
This is, I think this is a takeoff landing, kind of from the land usage. I mean, is there any, I mean, so far it's just been, oh, okay, well, I wasn't aware of that, no big deal, So obviously not challenged, but I'm not checking every municipality I look at. It's pretty much all non-restricted airspace in, bulk of Wisconsin. So as long as I'm not in the metropolitan area, usually I just pull up air map. Oh yeah, nothing recreational, you're fine.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, at some point, I'm just wondering, should it come down to it, what are my chances of fighting some of those local ordinances in court?
So a couple of things. One, you are correct. They can't restrict the airspace if it's not an FAA. The FAA at this point controls all the airspace from the grass all the way up. But what they can do is restrict where you can take off and land from. Now, there have been some good fightbacks against that. One of the best things to do is to kind of keep tabs on what's going on in your local legislation, whether it's city or state, and kind of try and get involved in that stuff. I know Vic Moss over at Drone U. He has a group, a UAS laws and regulations group that is almost dedicated to not only understanding those laws and regulations, but a lot of people post about regulations that are happening in their areas. People provide advice for, if that's going to work, if that's not going to work. And I know Vic has personally championed some efforts to either remove that regulation or to work in terms of a better outcome for that type of regulation. As an example, they can say, okay, you can't land or take off in a park, but you can go stand on a public sidewalk and fly over it anyway. It's really kind of goofy, and I hate the patchwork of laws that happen like that. And a lot of it is derived from, the fear of the residents in those areas. Now, in terms of challenging that kind of stuff, generally the best and easy way of challenging that stuff is to get caught and then go challenge it.
If you're
sure. No, and that's what I meant. I mean, obviously, so far they've been just, really nice and in talking with the local enforcement. I almost get the impression in some of the cities, and we're talking very small cities here.
Yeah.
Some of them are even village level.
Yeah.
Where it almost sounds like, well, we've got a, if we get a complaint, we have to investigate it, and of course, that could just be from a noise perspective. So no, it's been fine, and I think in some cases, if we had just called them ahead of time and said, "Hey, is that all right if we fly?" They'd probably be like, "Okay, sure."
Yeah.
Give me your phone number in case somebody calls.
And if you're lucky,
in other cases, they're kind of like citywide, like no public places. And
Right.
I mean, I'm just at some point gonna run into somebody that says, that wants to take it a little further and give me a citation, and I'm just in a nice way, obviously.
There are also two activities. One is there's a Senate bill by Senator Mike Lee. I think is he from Utah?
Yes.
And we are not proponents of this bill, but he's pushing for the airspace up to 200 feet to be regulated by local, state and local governments. And the reason we're no.
Yeah, I think it did include
there is some provision with by homeowners. So if you wanted to fly over a private property, you'd need to get permission. And so there are enough. Yeah, the government the book on this is that it has a 2% opportunity of passing, and it's been out there since October 2016, and it's a carbon copy of a bill that he issued about 4 years earlier. So we're hopeful that it doesn't get very far. The other interesting point is there is a group of tort lawyers that create common legislation for state and local municipalities. And to me, overall, that's a good thing. It makes the law of our land consistent from state to state, county to county. They were working for about 3 years on some rather onerous drone tort law, and they just absolutely shelved it last summer. And to me, that was very positive. So they just felt that there were too many difficulties, and it was not worth their energy to work on it. So that was great.
And if the Wisconsin Department of Transportation is anything like the Minnesota Department of Transportation, they actually want to hear about cities proposing regulations like this. And they've gone to city council meetings and talked some cities in Minnesota out of creating legislation like that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
For them.
Well, that was one thing I was interested in. Would it make sense to go to the state level to have to potentially work towards having local?
So yeah, I mean, here's like TextJet earlier said in Texas, they have a state law that prohibits cities, county, and other governments from regulating UAS. So basically the state level sets the UAS regulation for their entire state, and they basically enact preemption. They basically say that cities and counties cannot create additional rules beyond that. And Arizona has a law like that. Maryland has a law like that too. So that would be the best type of law that you could get, because at least at that point you're focused in on one entity being the state, as opposed to cities and towns and counties and all those disparate kind of things. And
Sure.
I will be the first person to say that overall the FAA having control over all the airspace is, while some of the stuff they may come up with are onerous and draconian, it gives you a focal point for that kind of stuff. To have to deal with a virtual patchwork of regulation from cities and counties and states and federal all at the same time would just be a hot mess, as well as taking into account your businesses, your residences, your state parks, your local parks, your all that kind of stuff. People don't understand how ridiculously time consuming that would get just to go out and fly for 5 minutes, or to put 5 packs through the air. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have that patchwork. It should be more broad and just one organization or a couple organizations in regards to that you have to deal with. So in this regard, it would be the federal and the state level, and nix all the ones below that. So
Yeah. Okay.
But I would definitely petition some of your state legislators to create a rule similar to what Arizona or Maryland or Texas has. I spoke about the Arizona one before. In fact, the state of Arizona dictated that every city has to provide a park in which model aircraft are able to be flown. And I believe the only one with an exception to that is Tempe, Arizona, and that's because the entire city sits within the flight paths of Sky Harbor Airport. So, but any city in the state of Arizona has to provide a park, a public park in which model aircraft can be flown, not just a AMA field or anything like that. So
That's great.
All right. Cool. Yeah, because I guess ultimately it's becoming difficult to figure out as we go from small little, all these little villages have nice parks, and sometimes when there's plenty of people at one, we drive 10 minutes, go to another, and when we find an open spot where we're not bothering anybody, it's nice to be able to, fly a couple of packs. But yeah, it's getting difficult to figure out where we can and can't fly anymore.
Totally agree. And I like to road trip from time to time, and even if it's just locally, like going up to Sedona or something, and I generally take my drones with me. And I want to know that, beyond a cursory, look at can I fly here or can I not fly here, that I don't have to worry about some, off the wall regulation about where I can take off and where I can't take off and stuff like that. I think that's what everybody, in the hobby wants, to be able to just, not live in fear that you're going to get arrested or cited for, doing something simple and fun.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem is just because it's unrestricted airspace, so I don't have to use the LAMP system. It's actually a lot easier to just use LAMPs. There I have approval. I can show that approval if somebody comes by.
Correct.
But with these small cities, unrestricted, there's really nothing for me to do except say, hey, I'm under the recreational here, so I'm good. But yeah.
Yep. Well, do keep in mind that Lance is a federal, system. It does not take into account local ordinances and stuff
Right.
like that.
Correct.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of these actually have, as I've looked, popped up within the last 2 years. So many of them as early, I think some of them came into into the books at the beginning of this year. So
Yeah,
I wish I'd
and
known.
I would imagine that some of that's going to accelerate as as drones become more and more used in the environment. The more exposure something has, the more people want to regulate it. But yeah. Any other questions, comments? Oh, we got a lot of people joining in late. Welcome, guys. I mean, at this
Actually,
point,
I got to bow out, Josh.
hey, I was about to wrap up anyway, Leland. So, I want to thank you all for coming this evening. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. And yeah, we'll see you in 2 weeks. And happy flying. And I hope everybody is safe and healthy. And yeah, so have a great night, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
too.
Right, guys.
Take care.